My name is Barry, 32 years old, a software engineer with a talent for coding that my family never understood. Sitting at the Thanksgiving table, I endured my sister Stephanie's smirk as she asked, "Still playing with computers?" Mom sighed, patting my hand. "At least it keeps him busy." I continued eating quietly, hiding the truth of my life. Suddenly, Dad's phone exploded with notifications, his eyes widening at the screen. Before we continue, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how my family's perception changed forever that night. Growing up in suburban Philadelphia, I was always the odd one out in my family. While other kids were outside playing football or joining school clubs, I was the boy who dismantled computers, rebuilt them, and stayed up coding until my eyes burned. My family never understood this passion. They saw it as a phase, then a hobby, and eventually a disappointment. My mother, Margaret, was a dedicated nurse at Philadelphia General Hospital for 25 years. She saved lives, came home with tangible stories of helping people, and wore her scrubs like a badge of honor. Dad, Thomas, was a structural engineer who helped build some of the most impressive buildings in the city. His work was concrete, visible, and respected. They were practical people with practical jobs that made obvious differences in the world. Then there was my sister Stephanie, 3 years younger but miles ahead in our family's eyes. She was the golden child from the start, straight-A student, debate team captain, homecoming queen, and eventually a corporate lawyer at one of the top firms in New York. Every family gathering was a showcase of Stephanie's latest achievements. Her promotion, her new luxury apartment, her handsome boyfriend Scott, who was also a lawyer. Our relatives treated her like royalty, while I was the mysterious older brother who did something with computers. "Barry has always been smart," my mom would say when relatives asked about me, just in his own way. The subtext was clear, not in the way that counts, not in the way that leads to obvious success. I still remember my high school guidance counselor's face when I told him I wanted to major in computer science. "Are you sure? Your math scores are good enough for pre-med or engineering." In my family's world, those were real careers. Coding was just something kids did. College wasn't much different. I attended Penn State on a partial scholarship, but my heart wasn't in the structured education. The professors were teaching concepts I had already taught myself years earlier. While they were explaining basic algorithms, I was developing my own security protocols at night in my dorm room. My roommate Justin would watch me coding for hours and shake his head. "Dude, you need to get out more. There's a party at Alpha Sigma tonight." I went occasionally to appease him, but I always felt like I was wasting precious time. By sophomore year, I knew university wasn't for me. The day I told my parents I was dropping out to pursue my own projects was the first time I saw true disappointment in my father's eyes. "Son, don't throw away your future on some computer fantasy," he said, standing in our kitchen, his coffee mug gripped tightly. "Get your degree first, then play with your side projects." My mother was more emotional. "Barry, please, we just want security for you. What happens if this doesn't work out? Who will hire you without a degree?" I tried to explain my vision for a new security platform that could revolutionize how companies protected their data, but their eyes glazed over. Technical terms were foreign language to them. All they heard was their son quitting school for a gamble. Fast forward 10 years, and to the outside world, it might have looked like my parents were right. I lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Austin, Texas. I drove a 7-year-old Honda Civic. I had few possessions beyond my high-end computers. To my family, I was just getting by, working remotely for some tech company nobody's heard of. Every Thanksgiving, I flew back to Philadelphia for the family gathering. Every year, it was the same parade of subtle digs and concerned looks. "Any advancement at work, Barry? Met anyone special yet? Have you thought about finishing your degree online?" And every year, I sat there and took it, knowing what they didn't, that the some company was mine, that I wasn't just getting by but building something revolutionary, and that soon, very soon, the truth would come out. I just never expected it to happen during turkey and cranberry sauce. This Thanksgiving was supposed to be like all the others. I arrived at my parents' colonial-style home Wednesday night, helped Mom with meal prep Thursday morning, and sat through the familiar ritual of Stephanie's grand entrance around noon. This time, with a new diamond bracelet from Scott and stories of their recent vacation to the Maldives. I steeled myself for the usual interrogation about my simple life, mentally rehearsing humble answers that would satisfy without revealing too much. The IPO was just weeks away. I had kept my secret for a decade. I could manage one more family holiday, or so I thought. The dining room in my parents' house has always been a stage for family drama. That Thanksgiving, it was set to perfection with Mom's best china, crystal glasses that only appeared on special occasions, and the silver candlesticks that had belonged to my grandmother. The golden brown turkey sat at the center like a judge presiding over family court. 14 people gathered around the table that day. Besides my immediate family, there was Aunt Beth, Mom's sister, a kindergarten teacher with a heart of gold, but a tendency to repeat whatever opinion was last spoken. Uncle Richard, Dad's older brother, a retired bank manager who measured success exclusively in dollars and square footage. His wife, Aunt Patricia, who had never worked but considered herself an expert on everyone else's career choices. Cousins Michael and Laura, both successful in conventional ways. Michael, an accountant, Laura, a pharmaceutical sales rep. Stephanie's boyfriend Scott sat beside her, looking every bit the successful lawyer in his cashmere sweater. And finally, our elderly neighbors, the Johnsons, who had known me since I was in diapers, and still treated me like I was 10 years old. "Let's say grace," my father announced, and we all bowed our heads as he thanked God for family, health, and prosperity. If only he knew just how prosperous his son actually was. The interrogation began as soon as the mashed potatoes were passed around. "So, Barry," Uncle Richard started, predictably, "still at that tech job? What is it you do again exactly?" He cut into his turkey with surgical precision, not even looking up for my answer. "I work in cybersecurity," I replied simply. "The fewer details, the better." "And that pays the bills?" he pressed, raising an eyebrow. "I manage," Aunt Patricia chimed in. "My friend Dorothy's son was into computers. Now he works at Google, makes a fortune. Have you ever thought about applying to a bigger company?" I took a sip of water. I like the flexibility of my current situation. "Flexibility," Stephanie snorted, reaching for the cranberry sauce. "Is that what we're calling unemployment these days?" "I'm not unemployed, Steph," I said evenly. "I work remotely." She turned to Scott, speaking as if I wasn't there. "Barry has been working remotely for years now. None of us have ever seen this mysterious company or met any of his colleagues." My mother jumped in, her voice carrying that familiar mix of defense and disappointment. "Barry is very good with computers. He just marches to his own drummer." "More like sits to his own keyboard," Stephanie quipped, earning a chuckle from Scott and Uncle Richard. Mr. Johnson, trying to be kind, made it worse. "You know, my grandson just got an internship at Microsoft. They're always hiring smart young fellows. I could put in a word?" I nodded politely. "Thank you, but I'm happy where I am." "Happy," Stephanie muttered. "Coding in your pajamas in a tiny apartment. Living the dream." Mom passed the green bean casserole my way. Barry has always been content with simple things. Cousin Michael leaned forward. "All business." "But seriously, at your age, shouldn't you be thinking about retirement planning, property investment? You're 32 now, right?" 32. "And still playing video games," Stephanie added. She turned to our mother. "Remember how we had to practically drag him outside as a kid?" Mom smiled weakly. "He was always so focused on those computer screens." "Some things never change," Dad said, but there was a resignation in his voice that cut deeper than criticism. Aunt Beth, trying to change the subject, asked, "Are you dating anyone, Barry?" Before I could answer, Stephanie jumped in. When would he have time between raid nights with his online friends? The table erupted in laughter, and I focused intently on cutting a piece of turkey that didn't need such careful attention. "Barry just needs to find a nice girl who'll pull him out of his shell," Aunt Patricia suggested, as if my personality was something to be fixed. The conversation mercifully shifted to Laura's promotion, then Michael's new house, then Stephanie's recent win in court. I ate quietly, offering congratulations when appropriate, asking polite questions about others' lives. The perfect invisible man. As dessert was served, Stephanie launched into a detailed account of the luxury cruise she and Scott were planning for New Year's. Just as she was describing their suite with a private balcony, she paused and looked directly at me. "What are your holiday plans, Barry? Another exciting weekend of, what do you call it, coding sprints?" There was such dismissal in her voice, such condescension. I'd heard it for years, but somehow today it stung more than usual. "Something like that," I muttered. "You know," she continued, addressing the whole table now, "I worry about Barry. 32 years old and still playing with computers. No real career progression, no assets, no relationship moving toward marriage." She sighed dramatically. "I just want him to grow up and live in the real world with the rest of us." Mom placed her hand over mine, a gesture that was both protective and pitying. "Barry is very good at what he does, and at least it keeps him busy." That was the moment, the exact moment, when I felt both the deepest hurt and the strangest anticipation. My own mother thought my life's work, my passion, my multi-billion-dollar innovation, was just something that kept me busy like a child with a coloring book. I continued eating my pumpkin pie in silence, letting the conversation wash over me. Just a few more weeks until the IPO. Just a few more weeks until they would all understand. And then my father's phone began to vibrate. What my family didn't know as they passed around that pumpkin pie was that my life took its decisive turn exactly 10 years ago, during my sophomore year at Penn State. It was during an otherwise ordinary data structures class that I first conceptualized what would become Secure Core. Professor Williams was explaining conventional encryption methods when I realized there was a fundamental vulnerability in how most systems handled authentication. That night, instead of attending the biggest party of the semester, I filled 3 notebooks with ideas for a completely new security protocol. 2 weeks later, I dropped out, despite my parents' objections. With my tuition refund and the $5,000 I'd saved from summer jobs, I moved into the cheapest apartment I could find in Austin, Texas, a tech hub where I could immerse myself in the startup ecosystem. Those first months were brutal. I lived on ramen noodles and coffee, coding 18 hours a day. My apartment was so small I had to sit on my bed to use my desk. The air conditioning worked only occasionally, which in Texas summer meant coding in boxers with frozen water bottles pressed against my neck. But none of that mattered, because I was building something I believed in. 3 months in, I met Jason Liu and Daniel Rodriguez at a local hackathon. Jason was a network architecture genius who had also dropped out of college, while Daniel had a PhD in cryptography but hated the corporate job he was stuck in. When I showed them my prototype, they immediately understood its potential. "This changes everything about perimeter security," Jason had whispered, scrolling through my code like it was sacred text. Daniel was more direct. "You realize this is worth millions, right?" We became partners that night, working from my tiny apartment for the next 4 months. Jason slept on my couch, Daniel on an air mattress on the floor. We incorporated as Secure Core, each of us owning an equal share. Our first breakthrough came when we secured a meeting with Vincent Torres, a venture capitalist known for taking chances on unconventional founders. I remember standing outside his office in the only dress shirt I owned, sweating not from the Texas heat but from nerves. "You have 15 minutes, his assistant had said coolly. We ended up staying 3 hours. "Your solution is elegant," Vincent said when we finished our demonstration, "but the market will fight you every step of the way. Established security firms will try to discredit you, copy you, or buy you out. Are you prepared for that battle?" We were young and naive enough to say yes without hesitation. Vincent invested $500,000 for a 10% stake. Looking back, it was a steal for him, but we needed the money and his connections. What followed were the hardest 5 years of my life. We rented a small office space, hired 4 more engineers, and worked around the clock to build our product. There were technical failures that sent us back to the drawing board. There were nights I slept under my desk rather than waste time going home. There were heated arguments so intense that once Jason didn't speak to me for 3 days. But there were victories too. Our first client, a mid-sized insurance company, reported that our system had stopped an attack that would have bypassed their previous security. Word began to spread in certain circles. More clients signed on. By year 6, we had 40 employees and were cash flow positive, but still relatively unknown outside specialized cybersecurity forums. This was partly strategic. We decided to grow slowly, serving select clients and perfecting our product before making any big public splash. I made another crucial decision during this time. I would keep my success secret from my family. At first, it was because there was nothing impressive to tell. We were just scraping by, and I didn't want to hear "I told you so" if we failed. Later, When success began to materialize, I realized something uncomfortable about myself. I wanted my family to value me for who I was, not what I had achieved or how much money I had made. Every Thanksgiving, Christmas, and occasional family visit, I downplayed my company. I described myself as working for a tech firm rather than co-founding and running one. I never mentioned our growing client list that included Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, and eventually, major banks. I lived far below my means. While I could have afforded a luxury condo, I stayed in my modest apartment. While I could have driven an expensive car, I kept my reliable Honda. I invested almost everything back into the company or into a secret trust I had established for future philanthropy. Last year, everything changed. A major data breach at one of our competitors demonstrated the superiority of our security model. Suddenly, SecureCore wasn't just respected in niche circles. It was the talk of the entire tech industry. Major corporations began switching to our platform. Our staff expanded to over 200 people. 3 months ago, our board of directors, which now included 2 additional venture capital partners, voted unanimously to take the company public. The IPO was scheduled for December 15th, just weeks away. The initial valuation was set at $8.9 billion. My share, even after dilution from additional funding rounds, would be worth $1.7 billion. I would become one of the youngest tech billionaires in America, and my family had absolutely no idea. I had planned to tell them after the IPO, once everything was finalized. I would invite them all to Austin, show them our headquarters, explain everything from the beginning. I had rehearsed this revelation countless times in my mind. But as fate would have it, the Wall Street Journal ran a feature on me that morning. The secretive genius behind SecureCore. How Barry Wilson built a cybersecurity empire in stealth mode. Complete with my photo and the $8.9 billion valuation prominently displayed. The article had gone live just as we were sitting down to Thanksgiving dinner. The cranberry sauce was making its second rotation around the table when my father's phone began to vibrate in his pocket. He normally never checked his phone during family meals. It was one of his strict rules. But after the third consecutive buzz, he frowned and pulled it out. "Sorry," he murmured, glancing down at the screen. "Might be work." I watched his expression change as he unlocked his phone. His eyebrows furrowed, then shot up. His mouth opened slightly. He looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. "Thomas, put that away," my mother scolded gently. "You know the rules about phones at dinner." "Margaret," my father said slowly, his voice strangely tight, "I think you need to see this." He handed his phone to my mother, whose reading glasses were hanging on a chain around her neck. She put them on, squinted at the screen, then gasped audibly. "What is it?" Stephanie demanded, already reaching for the phone. "Is everything okay?" My stomach tightened. I knew exactly what they were seeing, but I had no idea how to handle this unplanned revelation. The carefully rehearsed speech I had prepared for after the IPO evaporated from my mind. My mother looked up at me, her eyes wide with confusion. "Barry, is this you?" Before I could answer, Stephanie had snatched the phone and was reading aloud to the table. "The secretive genius behind SecureCore. How Barry Wilson built a cybersecurity empire in stealth mode." Her voice grew louder with each word. At 32, Wilson is poised to become one of the youngest tech billionaires when his company SecureCore goes public next month, with an estimated valuation of $8.9 billion. The table fell completely silent. Every eye turned to me. "This has to be a mistake," Uncle Richard said finally. "Some other Barry Wilson." Stephanie scrolled down frantically, then turned the phone around to show everyone my professional headshot accompanying the article. "It's him," she said flatly. Aunt Patricia leaned closer to the phone. $1.7 billion? She read incredulously. "That's Barry's personal share?" Scott let out a low whistle. "Is this true?" my father asked quietly, his voice steady, but his hands trembling slightly as he took his phone back from Stephanie. "Are you really the CEO of this company?" I took a deep breath. This wasn't how I wanted them to find out, but there was no going back now. "Co-founder and CEO," I corrected gently. "Along with 2 partners. And the valuation?" my mother pressed. $8.9 billion? That can't be right. "The actual number is confidential until the IPO," I explained, "but that estimate is in the ballpark." Stephanie slammed her fork down, making everyone jump. "You have got to be kidding me. All these years? All these years you've been pretending to be some struggling computer geek while you were actually building a billion-dollar company?" "I wasn't pretending anything," I said. "I just didn't broadcast my success." "Didn't broadcast?" she repeated incredulously. "You deliberately misled us. You let us think you were barely making ends meet. You let us worry about you. I let you believe what you wanted to believe," I countered, feeling a decade of suppressed frustration rising to the surface. "None of you ever really asked about my work. You just assumed I was wasting my time, because you never told us otherwise," my mother exclaimed, her voice breaking. "We're your family, Barry. Why would you keep this from us?" I looked around the table at the shocked faces of my relatives. The same people who had dismissed my passion for years were now staring at me like I was a stranger, or perhaps more accurately, like I was suddenly worth knowing. "So all this time," Uncle Richard said slowly, his voice taking on a new, almost reverential tone, "when you said you worked in cybersecurity, you actually meant you owned a cybersecurity company worth billions?" "The company wasn't always worth billions," I explained. "We started small. We grew carefully. The valuation is recent. But even before that," Aunt Beth interjected, "you must have been successful. Why drive that old car? Why live in that small apartment you always described?" I hadn't expected to have this conversation surrounded by half-eaten turkey and cooling gravy, but here we were. "I believed in what we were building, not in showing off wealth," I said simply. "Everything went back into the company or into our foundation." "Foundation?" my mother repeated. "You have a foundation too?" I nodded. "The Secure Core Educational Trust. We provide technology, education, and resources to underprivileged students. It was important to me." "More important than being honest with your family?" Stephanie snapped, though I could see uncertainty mixing with the anger in her eyes. Mr. Johnson, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "I think what your sister means, Barry, is that we've all been concerned about you. If we'd known you were doing so well, you would have treated me differently." I finished for him. "And that's exactly why I didn't tell you." The silence that followed was deafening. Scott, looking uncomfortable, finally broke it. "I think what everyone is trying to process, Barry, is why someone would hide their success. Most people want recognition for their achievements." I looked directly at him, then at Stephanie, then at my parents. "Recognition for achievements has never been a problem in this family," I said quietly. As long as they were the right kind of achievements, my words hung in the air like frost. My father pushed his plate away, his Thanksgiving dinner forgotten. "Son," he said heavily, "we need to talk about this. Properly." I stood up, suddenly needing space. "Yes, we do. But not here, not like this. I'm going to take a walk. I need some air." As I walked away from the table, I could hear the explosion of voices behind me. Questions, exclamations, theories. The familiar family dining room had transformed into a stock exchange trading floor, with my life as the hot commodity. Outside, the cold November air bit at my face, but I welcomed it. For 10 years, I had carried this secret, and now it was out in the most chaotic way possible. Part of me felt relief. Another part felt an unexpected sense of loss. The simple Barry they thought they knew was gone forever. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Jason. "Wall Street Journal article is live. Cat's out of the bag. You okay?" I typed back quickly. "Family just found out. Call you later." As I walked down the street where I had ridden my bike as a child, I wondered what would happen next. Would money change how my family saw me? Would they understand why I had kept my success private? Most importantly, would they finally see that playing with computers had never been a waste of time? The confrontation awaiting me back at the house would answer these questions one way or another. When I returned to the house 45 minutes later, the dining room had been abandoned. Plates with half-eaten pumpkin pie still sat on the table, evidence of how my revelation had disrupted the normal Thanksgiving rituals. From the living room, I could hear hushed but intense conversation. I hung my coat in the hall closet and walked toward the voices. As I entered the room, the conversation stopped abruptly. Aunt Beth and Uncle Richard were gathering their coats. The Johnsons had apparently already left. My cousins Michael and Laura stood awkwardly by the fireplace. "We should probably head out," Michael said, avoiding eye contact. "Congratulations on your success, Barry." Laura nodded stiffly. "Really impressive. We had no idea." There was a new discomfort in how they addressed me, as if they weren't sure how to talk to a billionaire. It was exactly what I had feared. After a flurry of awkward goodbyes, only my immediate family remained, along with Scott, who looked like he wished he could escape as well. My father sat in his recliner, looking older than I had ever seen him. My mother perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Stephanie stood by the window, arms crossed defensively. "I suppose we should talk," I said, taking a seat in the armchair opposite my father. "You suppose?" Stephanie's voice was razor-sharp. After dropping a billion-dollar bomb on Thanksgiving dinner, "I didn't drop anything," I replied calmly. "The article wasn't supposed to run until next week. I had planned to tell you all after the IPO, when everything was finalized." "And that makes it better?" she demanded. 10 years, Barry. 10 years of deception." "It wasn't deception," I insisted. "I just kept my professional success private." "From your family," my mother interjected softly. "That's what hurts, honey. We thought we knew you." Her words cut deeper than Stephanie's anger. In my mother's eyes, I saw not just surprise but genuine hurt. "You do know me," I said. "I'm the same person I've always been." "Are you?" my father asked, speaking for the first time. The son I knew wouldn't hide something of this magnitude from his family. The son I knew would share his triumphs as well as his struggles. I took a deep breath. "Did you ever consider that I didn't feel I could? That for as long as I can remember, my passion for technology was dismissed as a waste of time?" "We never said that," my mother protested weakly. "You didn't have to say it explicitly," I replied. "It was in every concerned look, every comparison to Stephanie's more traditional success, every suggestion that I should get a real job. Even today, Mom, you said my work keeps me busy, like I'm a child with a hobby." My mother's face flushed. "That's not fair. We were worried about you." "Were you worried about me? Or worried about how my choices reflected on you?" I challenged. "That's a horrible thing to say," Stephanie cut in. "Our parents have supported you your entire life." "They supported me as a person," I agreed. "But they never supported my vision." "None of you did." Scott shifted uncomfortably on the couch. "I think I should give your family some privacy," he murmured to Stephanie. "No, stay," I said. "You're practically family now, and frankly, you've been part of the dynamic. All those jokes about me playing with computers at past family gatherings?" You laughed right along. Scott had the grace to look embarrassed. My father leaned forward in his chair. "Barry, you have to understand our perspective. You dropped out of college. You moved across the country. You lived in a tiny apartment and drove an old car. Everything you told us indicated you were just getting by. And none of you ever asked for details," I pointed out. "You all assumed I had failed because my success didn't look like what you expected it to." "So this is our fault?" Stephanie's voice rose. "You lied to us for a decade, and somehow we're to blame?" "I didn't lie," I insisted. "I just didn't volunteer information to people who had already decided what my life was worth." A heavy silence fell over the room. My father stared at his hands. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. After what seemed like an eternity, Aunt Beth emerged from the kitchen where she had apparently been helping with cleanup. I hadn't realized she was still there. "You know," she said quietly, "I think I understand a little of what Barry might have felt." All eyes turned to her in surprise. "When I decided to become a kindergarten teacher," she continued, "everyone in the family questioned my choice. Why not aim higher? Why not make more money? Even you, Margaret," she said, looking at my mother, suggested I was wasting my potential. My mother looked startled. "I never said that." "Not in those words," Aunt Beth acknowledged. "But the message was clear. Some careers, some choices, are valued more than others in this family." I imagine Barry felt that pressure tenfold. I looked at my aunt with newfound appreciation. She had always been kind to me, but I had never realized she might have faced similar judgment. "Is that why, Barry?" my father asked, his voice softening. "You thought we wouldn't be proud unless you were successful in a conventional way." I considered his question carefully, partly, but there was more to it. Once the company started to succeed, I realized something about myself. I didn't want to be valued for what I had achieved or how much money I had made. I wanted to be accepted for who I was. "But who you are includes what you've built," my mother pointed out. "This company is part of you." "Yes," I acknowledged. "But would you have seen the real accomplishment, the technical innovation, the lives we've made better through our security solutions? Or would you have just seen the dollar signs?" Stephanie uncrossed her arms, her posture softening slightly. You really think that little of us, that we'd only care about the money? Look at how everyone reacted today, I said. Suddenly I'm worth talking to. Suddenly my work is fascinating. What changed? Not my actual work, just your perception of its value. Scott cleared his throat. He has a point, Steph. She shot him a glare but didn't argue. My father rose slowly from his chair and came to sit on the coffee table directly in front of me, our knees almost touching. Son, he said, his voice thick with emotion, I owe you an apology. We all do. We should have trusted your path, even if we didn't understand it. We should have asked more questions, shown more interest. He paused, taking a deep breath. I am incredibly proud of what you've built. Not because of the money, but because you had a vision and you followed it, despite everything. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I held them back. Thank you, Dad. That means a lot. My mother moved to sit beside me, taking my hand in hers. I'm sorry too, Barry. I was so afraid you were struggling that I never considered you might be thriving in your own way. I squeezed her hand. I know you were worried. I should have found a way to reassure you without revealing everything before we were ready to go public. Stephanie remained by the window, the last holdout. I still don't understand, she said finally. All these years, watching me brag about my job, my apartment, my vacations. Why didn't you ever say anything? Just to me, if not to everyone? I looked at my sister, seeing beyond her anger to the hurt beneath. Would you have kept it a secret? Honestly? She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. We both knew the answer. I needed to protect the company, I explained. We were developing groundbreaking security technology. The fewer people who knew about our work, the better, until we were firmly established. And now? She asked. Now that everyone knows? Now, I said, I'd like to finally share this part of my life with all of you, properly. If you're willing to listen. Stephanie held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'm listening. The tension in the room began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious openness. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't perfect understanding. But it was a beginning. I think, my father said, rising again, we could all use some coffee. And then Barry can tell us the real story, from the beginning. As he headed to the kitchen, I realized that this Thanksgiving had become a turning point I hadn't anticipated. The truth was out, messy and unplanned. The carefully constructed wall between my family life and professional life had crumbled. What would be built in its place remained to be seen. But for the first time in 10 years, I felt like I could finally be my whole self with my family. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. The week after Thanksgiving passed in a blur of media attention, investor calls, and frantic preparations for the IPO. The Wall Street Journal article had triggered a cascade of coverage, with every tech publication scrambling for interviews and details about the secretive genius behind Secure Core. I declined most requests, focusing instead on ensuring our public offering would proceed smoothly. But amid the professional chaos, I made one decision that surprised my partners. I invited my entire family to visit our headquarters in Austin the following Saturday. Are you sure that's a good idea right now? Jason asked when I told him. We're less than 2 weeks from the IPO. Timing seems weird. It's important, I insisted. They need to see what we've built. Really see it, not just read about it in the press. Daniel, always the more emotionally intuitive of my partners, nodded slowly. I get it. This isn't about the IPO. It's about your family. Exactly 1 week after the Thanksgiving revelation, my parents, Stephanie and Scott, arrived at the gleaming glass building that housed Secure Core's headquarters. I had arranged for a private jet to bring them to Austin, my first real display of the wealth I had accumulated. Their faces as they stepped into our lobby told me everything. The sleek modern space with its floating staircase and digital art installations was a far cry from the small startup they had imagined. The Secure Core logo, illuminated on the wall behind the reception desk, pulsed with subtle blue light. This is impressive, my father said quietly, taking it all in. A young receptionist approached us. Good morning, Mr. Wilson. Everyone is gathered in the main conference room as requested. I nodded my thanks and turned to my family. Ready for the tour? As we walked through the building, I explained each department's function. The development floor, where 60 engineers worked on our core platform. The Client Services Division, which provided 24/7 support to companies around the world. The Research Lab, where we tested new security protocols against emerging threats. "How many employees do you have now?" my mother asked, watching people hurry past with purpose. 217 in this building, I answered. Another 83 working remotely around the world. 300 people, she breathed. "And you manage them all?" "With Jason and Daniel," I corrected. Speaking of whom, we had reached the main conference room, where my partners waited along with our executive team. After introductions, I invited everyone to be seated. "I've asked you all here today because I want you to understand what SecureCore really is," I began. "Not the valuation, not the IPO, but our mission and impact." I nodded to our technical director, who dimmed the lights and started a presentation. 4 years ago, I continued as images appeared on the screen, Methodist Hospital in Henderson, Kentucky, was hit by a ransomware attack. Their entire system was locked down. Patient records, monitoring equipment, everything. The screen showed news coverage of the crisis, doctors and nurses frantically working with paper charts. "They were using our security platform, an early version," I explained. "While other systems in the hospital were compromised, our protective layer around their critical patient care systems held. Not a single patient record was lost. Not a single piece of monitoring equipment went offline." My mother, the nurse, leaned forward intently. "The attack was stopped because of an algorithm I wrote in that tiny apartment I lived in," I said quietly. "The one you all thought was a sign of my failure. I wasn't trying to make them feel guilty, but I needed them to understand." The presentation continued, showing other instances where our security had prevented major breaches. A school district whose teacher payroll system we protected. A small credit union whose members' savings remained safe during a coordinated attack. "Last year," I said, advancing to the next slide, "we established the SecureCore Educational Trust." Images of young students working at computers filled the screen. "We've provided technology, education, and resources to over 3,000 underprivileged students across the country. Every employee at SecureCore volunteers teaching hours. We believe everyone deserves access to the tools and knowledge that will shape the future." I glanced at Stephanie, who was watching the presentation with an unreadable expression. "This," I said, gesturing to the room, "the building, the company, is what playing with computers built. Not just wealth, but security for millions of people, and opportunity for thousands of students." The lights came back up. Jason and Daniel dismissed the executive team, leaving just my family in the conference room. "I have something else to show you," I said, reaching into my briefcase. I pulled out a worn, creased envelope and handed it to my father. "What's this?" he asked. "A letter I wrote 10 years ago, just after we incorporated. I never sent it." My father opened the envelope carefully and began to read aloud. "Dear Mom and Dad, I know you're worried about my decision to leave school. I know you think I'm making a terrible mistake, but I need you to understand that I've found my purpose. The security platform I'm building could protect millions of people from digital threats most don't even understand yet. I promise you that one day you'll be proud of what I've created. Not because it made me rich or famous, but because it mattered. It helped people. It made a difference in ways that a conventional career never could for me. I hope someday you'll see that playing with computers was never a waste of time. It was always my way of changing the world. Love, Barry." The room fell silent as my father carefully refolded the letter. "You've kept this all these years?" my mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. I wanted to send it, but I was afraid it would sound like empty promises. I decided to wait until I could prove it wasn't. My father cleared his throat. "You never needed to prove anything, son. Not to us." "Clearly I did," I replied without bitterness. "But that's in the past now. What matters is where we go from here." Stephanie, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the presentation, finally spoke. "I've been awful to you," she said bluntly. "For years. I've been dismissive and condescending about your work. I've made jokes at your expense. She paused, visibly struggling. "I've treated you like you were less than me because your success didn't look like mine." It was perhaps the first time in our adult lives I'd seen my sister humbled. "Why?" I asked simply. She looked surprised by the question. "Why what? Why did it matter so much to you how I lived my life? Why did my choices bother you?" She thought for a moment. I I think part of me was afraid. Afraid? Of what? That you were right, she admitted. That there was another path to success that didn't involve the sacrifices I was making. The 80-hour weeks, the office politics, the constant pressure. You seemed free, and I resented that. Her honesty stunned me. It was a level of self-awareness I hadn't expected. I'm sorry, she continued. I really am, and I'm incredibly proud of what you've built here. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw beyond the polished exterior to the person underneath. Someone who, like me, had been trying to prove her worth in her own way. Thank you, I said. That means a lot. My mother, wiping tears from her eyes, reached out to take both our hands in hers. My children, she said with a wavering smile, both so brilliant in such different ways. I'm sorry we ever made you feel you had to compete. Daniel, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. Barry never told us much about his family, but what he did share was that you raised someone with incredible integrity. He could have flaunted his success years ago. He could have lived lavishly. Instead, he poured everything back into building something meaningful. My father nodded, a new understanding in his eyes. We have a lot of catching up to do, he said. A lot to learn about your world, Barry. I'd like that, I replied, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. As we left the conference room to continue the tour, Stephanie fell into step beside me. So, she said with a hint of her old mischievous smile, does being a billionaire tech genius mean you can afford to buy your big sister lunch? I laughed, the sound echoing down the hallway of the empire I had built while no one was watching. I think that can be arranged. 6 months after the Thanksgiving revelation, we gathered again as a family, but in circumstances so different they seemed to belong to another lifetime. My parents had flown to Austin for the weekend to see the new educational center Secure Core had established downtown. Stephanie and Scott had come too, ostensibly to help with the legal aspects of our expanding foundation, but really just to be part of the celebration. The IPO in December had exceeded even our most optimistic projections. Secure Core stock had soared on its first day of trading and continued to climb steadily in the months that followed. Financial analysts who had dismissed us as overvalued were now scrambling to explain our success to their clients. But the money, substantial as it was, wasn't what had changed my life most profoundly. What mattered more was the honesty that now existed between me and my family. The walls I had built to protect myself from their judgment had come down, and in their place was growing a new understanding. I still can't believe you kept all this secret for so long, my father said as we sat on the patio of my new home, a beautiful but not ostentatious house on the outskirts of Austin. It was the first real indulgence I had allowed myself after the IPO. It became a habit, I admitted, and then a principle. I wanted to succeed on my own terms. Well, you certainly did that, he chuckled, looking out over the rolling Texas hills that stretched behind my property. I've been reading about your security protocols, trying to understand them. This was new, my father making a genuine effort to comprehend my work. He had even taken an online course in basic programming. Any questions? I asked. About 1 million, he confessed. But I'm getting there. That blueprint you showed me for the new quantum-resistant encryption model was fascinating. I smiled, remembering how he had pored over the technical diagrams last night, asking thoughtful questions. He might never fully understand the complexities of what we did at Secure Core, but he was trying. That effort meant everything. Inside, I could hear my mother and Stephanie laughing as they prepared dinner together. Another change. Stephanie visiting regularly, our relationship healing through honest conversations and shared projects. She had become surprisingly involved in our educational foundation, using her legal expertise to expand its reach. The past 6 months hadn't been without challenges. The sudden public attention had been jarring after years of deliberate obscurity. There had been awkward moments with extended family and old acquaintances who suddenly wanted to reconnect. There had been painful discussions with my parents about why I hadn't trusted them enough to share my success. You know what I'm working on now? I said to my father, changing the subject. Something even more revolutionary than Secure Core, he asked with a smile. A project with the city of Philadelphia, I replied. We're establishing a technology education center in our old neighborhood. Free classes for kids who might not otherwise have access to computer science education. My father's eyes widened. In Philly? You're coming back east? Not permanently, I clarified, but I'll be there for the launch next month, and I was hoping you might help with the design of the physical space." "Me?" He seemed genuinely surprised. "What could I contribute?" "Dad, you're a structural engineer. You understand how to create spaces that work for people. This center needs to be welcoming, functional, inspiring. Who better to consult than you?" The pride that spread across his face was worth more than all the billions SecureCore had generated. "I'd be honored," he said simply. Inside, the patio door slid open, and Stephanie emerged with a glass of wine in hand. "What are you two conspiring about out here?" she asked, taking a seat beside me. "Barry's asked me to help design his new tech center in Philadelphia," our father answered, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. "The education initiative?" Stephanie asked. "That's perfect. Dad will make sure it's structurally sound while remaining aesthetically pleasing." "Exactly," I agreed. "And I was hoping you might look over the scholarship program we're developing to go along with it." She nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that, actually. What if we structured it as a community trust rather than a direct corporate initiative? There might be tax advantages, plus it would give local stakeholders more ownership." This was the new normal. My sister and I collaborating instead of competing, each bringing our distinct expertise to shared goals. The corporate lawyer and the tech entrepreneur, finally on the same team. My mother called us in for dinner, and as we gathered around the table, so different from that tense Thanksgiving meal 6 months ago, I was struck by how much had changed. Not just externally, in terms of my public identity or financial status, but internally, in the way I related to my family and they to me. "Before we eat," my father said, raising his glass, "I want to propose a toast to Barry, whose vision and persistence created not just a successful company, but a force for good in the world. We're so proud of you, son, not because of what you've achieved, but because of who you are." "To Barry," the others echoed, raising their glasses. I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the Texas evening. "Thank you," I said, "but I'd like to propose a different toast. To family, who may not always understand each other, but who can learn to respect each other's paths." We clinked glasses, and as we enjoyed the meal together, the conversation flowing easily between topics, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. For so long, I had defined myself in opposition to my family's expectations. I had kept my success secret partly out of principle, but also, I now realized, out of a lingering resentment. I had wanted to prove them wrong so badly that I had denied them the chance to be right, to see my vision, to support my journey, to share in my triumph. The real breakthrough hadn't been the IPO or the billions. It had been the moment I stopped needing to prove anything and simply allowed myself to be known. The moment I trusted that my family could love me for who I was, not what I had achieved. And in doing so, I had freed them from the narrow roles I had assigned them in my narrative: the disapproving father, the worried mother, the judgmental sister. I had given them the chance to grow beyond my perception of them, just as I had grown beyond theirs of me. True success, I had discovered, wasn't measured in stock valuations or media coverage. It was found in the freedom to be authentically yourself and to pursue what matters to you, while remaining connected to those you love. It was about creating value, yes, but value that extended beyond financial metrics to touch real lives. As the evening wound down and we moved to the living room for coffee, Stephanie nudged me gently. "Remember when I used to mock you for playing with computers?" she asked with a rueful smile. "Hard to forget," I replied dryly. "I was so focused on traditional definitions of success," she mused. "Corner office, expensive suits, impressive title. It took me a long time to understand that you weren't avoiding success. You were redefining it." Her insight surprised me. "That's exactly it," I agreed. "I never wanted to reject success. I just needed to pursue it on my own terms, in a way that aligned with my values and vision." "Well, I've learned my lesson," she laughed. "My 4-year-old nephew is showing interest in computers. Instead of pushing him toward T-ball, I bought him his first coding game." "Stephanie Wilson, tech advocate," I teased. "Never thought I'd see the day." "People change," she said simply, "when they're willing to learn from their mistakes." As the evening came to a close, and my family prepared to return to their hotel, my mother pulled me into a tight embrace. "I'm sorry we ever made you feel your passion wasn't valuable," she whispered. "I was so afraid you were limiting your future, when you were actually expanding possibilities for so many people." "It's okay, Mom," I assured her. "We all did the best we could with what we understood at the time." After they left, I stood in my quiet house, reflecting on the strange and winding path that had led me here. From the little boy obsessed with computer parts, to the billionaire CEO, from the family outsider, to being embraced for exactly who I was. I still played with computers. I always would. But now, that phrase had lost its sting. It had been reclaimed as a badge of honor, a description of the joyful pursuit that had allowed me to change the world in my own way. And in the end, that joy, the pure, unadulterated pleasure of building, creating, solving problems that mattered, was what I had protected all along. Not my ego, not my pride, but my right to find meaning in work that spoke to my soul. That was the legacy I hope to share through our educational initiatives, that success comes not from conforming to others' expectations, but from having the courage to follow your unique vision, even when those closest to you don't yet understand it. I am still playing with computers, and I always will be. Because sometimes, what looks like play to others is actually the most serious, meaningful work you can do. It's just a matter of perspective. What's your perspective? Have you ever had your passion dismissed by people who didn't understand its value? How did you stay true to your vision despite doubt from others? Comment below with your experience, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Remember, your unique path matters, even when others can't see where it's leading. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep following your own definition of success.